even crazy brains deserve a happy ending. This is chapter 15 of Author Talks with Lisa T, and coming up, I chat with TikToker turned author and self-described possessor of a crazy brain, Emma Noyes, whose deeply personal new novel, How to Hide in Plain Sight, features a heroine with severe OCD who learns how to open herself up to love.
I'm going to start with a question that you've probably been asked a couple of times already, but why don't you start off with telling us a little bit about How to Hide in Plain Sight?
So this is actually the first book that I ever wrote. It's my fifth book being published, but it's the first one I finished, like a full novel. And I started it during maybe in the middle of quarantine, maybe at the very beginning of quarantine in 2020. And I had a big spike in my OCD symptoms, which had been kind of stagnant for a while. And during that resurgence, I started writing about my obsessions and compulsions. And from that, I suddenly found myself writing from the perspective of a character from Elliot Beck, who's the protagonist of this novel. And I didn't write it with the thought that it would be published one day. I sort of thought, to me, authors were like celebrities, like I was like, I could never do that. I could never be that. But my mom really encouraged, she saw how much I loved it, and I spoke to her a bit about how much the book meant to me, and she said, you should really give this a go. And so this was the book that got me trying to kind of start my publishing career.
So, how did you know the time was right now to put this book out into the world?
I think that the version that I finished in 2020 is very different than the version that's being published now. And I think that uh, because it was my first book, I still had a lot of growing and learning to do before. And I'm really glad that I waited this long for it to be published, because I think it's so much better in its final form than it was originally. So I think I think it all kind of worked out nicely.
So, your main character, Elliot, grows up, moves away from her family, but there's
Mhm.
a big family wedding that brings her back. And I
Yes.
think for a lot of people who experience that, there's always tension and stress, but it's so much extra for her because of her OCD.
Mm-hmm.
Before reading this book, I'd never heard of relationship OCD. Can you kind of tell us what that is and what that's about?
Absolutely. So relationship OCD is a subset of OCD where your obsessions are really focused on the relationship that you're in at the time. So um, you're with a partner and you become obsessed with, and there can be many different versions of it. For example, for me, when I was 15, the first time I experienced it, I had a boyfriend and I became really obsessed with being like the perfect girlfriend for him, and that manifested as like never doing anything wrong, never causing any fights between us, but in particular, never cheating on him. And that's not just the way that people usually think of cheating, of like kissing someone else or sleeping with someone else. It became so, I got so much in my own head, and the obsessions became so sort of circuitous and detail oriented, that it was things as small as if the spit from someone else's mouth landed on my hand and I didn't wash it off, then in my mind, in my OCD brain, that meant I had cheated on my boyfriend. And I would worry so much about feeling guilty. I would feel like I had to confess to him. Confession or reassurance seeking is a really common but lesser known OCD compulsion. Relationship OCD can manifest in other ways. Like it can be you worry compulsively about, is my partner the right person for me? Do I love them as much as they love me? It can manifest in a lot of different ways, and it's a pretty common form of OCD, but it's one that's not as talked about.
Through Elliot, you give us a sense of what it's like to live with this and what your brain's doing. And I can't even imagine what the day to day must be like for someone who is going through this.
Mhm. I actually was just talking to my husband this morning about I still struggle with OCD on a smaller level today, but it's much better managed through therapy and medication. But I was talking to him about when my relationship OCD first sprung up when I was 15 and got really bad. And I was telling him how I would think about it nonstop, and I would have a mental log of all the places where I had felt or imagined that I had felt spit from someone else's body, from someone else's mouth land on my body. So it would be like there's a spot on my wrist, on my upper arm, on my leg, on my knee. And then at the end of the day, I would take a shower and I would wash myself in a very specific way, making sure I hit all of those spots in a certain order. So, and he was like, "Oh my God, that sounds exhausting." And I'm like, "Yeah, it was." It was totally exhausting to live inside that brain.
And anyone who will pick up the book or already has picked up the book will identify those examples, because these are things that Elliot shares with us in the book.
Mhm.
Was it difficult to write a character that hits so close to home?
Writing has always been my outlet for my emotions, especially like really extreme emotions. So extreme sadness, extreme happiness, whatever sort of the peaks and the valleys of emotion, I tend to go to my journal or to my computer. So in some ways, it was really cathartic. Um, in other ways, it was difficult. But the beautiful thing about writing, like a romance with these mental health themes, is that I get to give my character a happy ending, and that's something that I think people who struggle with these issues, and I know that I felt this way when I was 16, when I was 18, when I was 24, um, it causes this belief that, you are unlovable, or never no one will ever be able to see through the darkness and be with you. But I get to give my characters those happy endings, and I had my own happy ending in my own life, which is really lovely. And I don't know, I get to create hope for my readers, which I think is really nice.
And I know there are always doubters out there or haters out there who might be thinking, really, she used a rom-com
Mhm.
to tackle this subject. And I know you have very strong opinions about why this genre is suited
Mhm.
to talking about mental health. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Like I just mentioned, in romance, I mean, not every romance has a happy ending, but I like to give my characters, at least, even if it's not a happy ending with their love interest, at least a happy ending with themselves, and with like the kind of journey towards self love and self acceptance. And I think that romance in particular has these big kind of grand, declarations of love, resolutions, that sort of thing. And I think the hope that it gives readers, again, is so important. I've had people who've read How to Hide in Plain Sight have DM'd me or reached out to me like via my website to tell me I love this book. I felt so seen, and it gave me so much hope that I will find my own Manuel one day in the future. And I'm like, that's exactly what I was going for. So it's lovely to hear.
Yeah, I think you hit on something that, there's been a lot of talk recently in publishing about representation.
Mhm.
And, that's not just something that, is about your sexual identity or the color of your skin. It's really about identifying where everyone lies in it and being able to see yourself in these characters that you want to read about.
Yes, absolutely. Like when I was in the thick of my OCD as a teenager, I loved reading romance novels as a sort of form of escapism, and I still do to this day. But pretty much all the characters across the board that I read in romance novels growing up were neurotypical. They might have struggles, but they didn't specifically have OCD or depression or anxiety, and it wasn't labeled as such. And I think that when you don't see that in your heroes in storybooks, you kind of grow up with the belief of, oh, I can never have that happy ending because I'm not neurotypical. I have a crazy brain, and that's going to keep me from being able to be loved. But that's just not true. That's again why I love writing romance so much, is I want to show people who have, crazy brains like mine, that they are lovable and that they deserve a happy ending as well.
When you were ready to dust this book off and bring it to your editors, were you worried that you might have a tough time convincing them that this was a worthwhile topic, or were you pretty sure that they'd be on board?
Oh my God, I was really nervous to turn this book in, because I think probably the biggest reason is because in the form of OCD that I have and that Elliot has, some of the obsessions, like the subject matter of the obsessions, is very taboo. It's things like, oh, I'm scared that I'm attracted to my sibling. I'm scared that I'm attracted to a little kid. I'm scared. All these things that are very like taboo to talk about in society. Um, and that for that exact reason, that's why people who have this type of OCD are so afraid that it's real, that they are like this monster that they believe themselves to be, because it's not talked about and because it's so taboo. People aren't like really open. And as I've become more open talking about my own OCD on social media, like I've had, you know, you're always going to have some negative responses, some negative comments, and I get people, commenting on a TikTok and saying, "Oh, you think you're attracted to a little kid? Like you're a monster, blah blah blah." And I'm like, "Wow, you sound exactly like my OCD. Crazy." But for the most part, it's been really positive, and I know that it's made an impact on people who have seen it and know that they have OCD, or maybe have never even heard that that's a possible diagnosis for them, and it's brought them a lot of relief.
I like this. You're using social media for good.
Yes, for once.
So I know that Elliot and Manuel get their happy for now ending.
Mhm.
I really do hope, though, and I think you touched on this a little bit, that she realizes she deserves all the love and all the happiness that's out there for her.
Mhm. Mhm. I mean, listen, I'm still on that journey myself. I have an amazing partner, amazing family, amazing friends, but when you struggle with your mental health, it's kind of a lifelong thing, and it's a lifelong process of self-acceptance and really kindness, and understanding with yourself. And I'm sure that'll be the case for Elliot as well. It'll be, highs and lows, ups and downs.
I just want to switch gears quickly and talk about Elliot's family and the setting for this book, because this island, this summer island that they all get to jet off to because they have lots and lots of money. It
Yeah.
just sounds like an incredible place. Is it based on is it a real place, or is it a figment of your imagination?
So, both. The area that it takes place in, this area of Ontario, is very real. It's gorgeous. My family has been going there pretty much every summer for my whole life. My dad went to summer camp in that area when he was 10, and then he bought a cabin there later in life that we've gone to every summer. The island is a little more, imagined. I think in my mind, it's a really good metaphor for Elliot's brain. She's stuck inside her brain, and she can't escape, and this whole family is kinda stuck on this island together and can't escape. And so all the drama and the shit has to kinda come forth that has not been spoken of.
You had the perfect setting. You could have had a romance or a locked room mystery, murder mystery
Yeah,
there.
yeah, totally.
So what's next for you?
I actually have um, I said that this was the first book I wrote, but the fifth one that was published. The first book that I published was a young adult fantasy, the first book in a young adult fantasy trilogy called The Sunken City. And that trilogy is since completed, and all three of those were self-published. But in July of next year, I have the first book in a completely different YA fantasy romance trilogy. It's called Soul of Shadow. It's coming out with Wednesday Books. I'm so excited. It's a totally switching gears for me from serious mental health literature over to fun. Takes place at a high school. It's kind of got a Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the Vampire Diaries type vibe to it. And it that really just shows you the two types of books that I love to read and that I love to write. Totally different genres.
And also, it sounds like the perfect book and series to get yourself out of your own head.
Yes, 100%.
So we've been talking to Emma Noyes. The new book is How to Hide in Plain Sight. Emma, thank you so much for your time today and really shining a light on something that, like you said, a lot of people maybe feel uncomfortable in talking about, and maybe we've been able to reach someone in this interview, and I know through your social media, and let them realize that they're not alone.
Thank you so much for having me, Lisa.
And that's where we close the book on this chapter. If you want to read more about OCD and its different subtypes, check out the International OCD Foundation at iocd.org. Next time, we dive into a sweet historical romance that proves you're never too old to fall in love. Until then, follow me for more bookish content on Instagram at Lisa T Books. You can also show your love by becoming a Patreon member of this podcast, which will get you access to my monthly newsletter, archived interviews, reading lists, and more. Just head on over to patreon.com/Lisa T Books. Keep turning those pages. I'm Lisa T.